What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson, and today we're going to be previewing training camp, but taking a look at players with something to prove this year at training camp and throughout the regular season as well, because the Giants officially report for training camp today. That's right, they are back in the building. Giants football is nearly here. They take the practice field for the first time of the season tomorrow, Wednesday, the first training camp practice. Really exciting stuff. And Alex and I will be at training camp next week on Thursday and Friday. So if you're going to be there for Thursday and Friday's practice next week, come say what's up to us and talk some Giants with us. We're happy to say what's up and give you guys some stickers and just talk some ball with you all and enjoy the Giants practices, since, again, they're finally back on the field. It feels like this offseason just went on forever at a certain point. It got so slow and, there just wasn't much to really discuss and not a lot of news moving. But even today, we got some news. The Giants signed a safety, Kavon Williams. They had him in last month, during mandatory minicamp for a veteran tryout. Tryout seemingly went well because they decided to sign him today, adding some depth at the safety position. He's 27 years old, has been in the league for 5 seasons, and has around 70 combined tackles in his career with about 15 starts under his belt. So that's the update on Kavon Williams. Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? How excited are you for the start of training camp? And if you have any, kind of low-key thoughts on this Kavon Williams signing. It's not really an earth-shattering signing by any means, but, how are you feeling going into training camp?
I'm feeling pretty good, man. The truth is the Giants have given us a reason to be optimistic this year. They have a competitive team for the most part on paper. We'll have to see what happens during actual gameplay, but I keep coming back to this defense and keep looking at it and saying this pass rush could be special, could be something that we haven't seen in a decade in terms of just upside. So I'm pretty excited to see how they progress as a unit, how the chemistry starts to blend together. We keep seeing the Kayvon Thibodeau, social media posts and how hard he's working. I think drafting Abdul Carter might have been the best thing that the Giants did to Kayvon Thibodeau, because he looks like he's trying to really work his way into this equation. Now they're going to get them all on the field at the same time, but like Kayvon's got minutes to fight for now. Like Abdul Carter will play over him if he does not step up. And I think there's many ways they can get everyone involved, but I think this pass rush with Brian Burns and Dexter Lawrence and Abdul Carter and Kayvon and, Darius Alexander there now, there's so much talent, an embarrassment of riches. So as long as Shane Bowen can not hold them back, I'm pretty optimistic this is going to be a dangerous defense. And for any quarterback, you got to watch your back for the most part. So secondary, much improved with Javon Holland and Paulson and Debo in there. So a work in progress, but, I'm definitely excited to talk about some guys that really have a lot to prove this season, players that are on the cusp, players that really need to see some winning football. I think winning makes everybody better, and the Giants have done a whole lot of losing, and you just don't see the key players you need to develop take those steps forward because the mental weakness is there. Like you just don't really feel that I guess urgency. And the Giants have some players that need to urgently improve. So I'm excited to talk about them, excited to go to training camp, and obviously a small signing, but depth is critical. The Giants always need depth, and Kavon Williams has played a lot of snaps in the NFL, about 1,500. So that's a nice chunk, and I think that he gives you a little bit of insurance policy during training camp at the very least.
Yeah, just a camp body for the most part, but definitely a solid contributor who has competed on a regular season field before, which I think is important. But also he does have some special teams versatility, which I think is something that obviously the Giants value and not enough people have talked about. Last season with the Seahawks, he was on the field for 21% of their defensive snaps, but 53% of their special team snaps. So Kavon Williams there, signing with the Giants, not only giving them depth at safety, but also potentially being a contributor in the third facet of the game on special teams. I'm happy that you mentioned the defense, though, Alex. You mentioned Kayvon Thibodeau. I'll give my take on him as well as a player who I think is under pressure to perform. But one thing that I want to say, you mentioned that you feel like this defense could do something that we haven't seen in 10 years. I'll tell you exactly what that thing is, right? And I don't know if you knew this, Alex. This is a fun fact for you potentially. The Giants have not had 2 players cross double-digit sacks in the same season since 2010. Justin Tuck and Osi Umenyiora. That's right, a 15-year drought could potentially be ended this season. In fact, I would bet a lot of money that drought gets ended this season by the New York Giants. Of those 4 pass rushers that they've got, one of them surely, or 2 of them surely are going to go for double-digit sacks, in my opinion. But also a fun fact here, the defender on the Giants that most recently had double-digit sacks is who you just mentioned, Kayvon Thibodeau. He's done it more recently than anybody else. Dexter Lawrence has never done it. and Brian Burns hasn't done it since 2022. So 2023, when Kayvon Thibodeau had 11.5 sacks, that is the most recently that a Giants defender currently on this roster had double-digit sacks, not including the 12 that Abdul Carter had at Penn State last season at the collegiate level. But I think that's pretty exciting when you look at it from that perspective, Alex, and you say, hey, it's been 15 years since we've had 2 players get double-digit sacks. Honestly, there are 4 players with the potential to do it on this defensive line. Only one team in NFL's history, the 2022 Philadelphia Eagles, has ever had 4 players go for double-digit sacks. Several teams have had 3 players with double-digit sacks. The Giants maybe are one of them. I don't think so. But only one team has had 4, and the Giants haven't had 2 in 15 years. I'm thinking that it's going to happen this year. But Alex, why or why wouldn't it be Kayvon Thibodeau? In your opinion, what could help him get to double-digit sacks, or why might he not reach that illustrious threshold?
I mean, the reasons for him getting there are pretty clear. 1, he has to stay healthy. 2, he's got to be consistent. And 3, he's got to be on the field. So, and when I say that, I mean, Abdul Carter cannot outplay him at every single facet. So, I do think there's plenty of opportunities for them to be involved. And what I like the most about what the Giants have done in this pass rush and why Kayvon Thibodeau, remember when he was a rookie and we saw him really flash in the fourth quarter? He made some big time plays, that fumble to Lamar Jackson, that we won that game against the Ravens that nobody expected. We've seen him be the closer. I remember there was one point we were calling him the closer, but then everything kind of fell apart. The injuries, the inconsistencies, the losing, it takes its toll, to be quite frank. And I think this team has a lot more upside this season, and the optimism, certainly, you could feel it just around the team. And even on social media, the negativity is not as usual as it usually is. But I will say this with Kayvon, he's got all the potential in the world. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, if you're a baseball guy, a pitcher with blazing velocity with horrible command. You know what I mean? Like, he can throw the ball 100 miles an hour. He just doesn't know how to command it. So I think that Kayvon's got all this talent, this raw, like triple-digit fastball talent. He just cannot control it, and he cannot find a way to maximize it. Changing the defense on him after his first year definitely didn't help. And, I do think last year we saw a little bit more, or rather after his second season, I believe. So, changing the defense doesn't help. You get to learn a whole new system and, got injured. So there's a lot of reasons he's been kind of behind the 8 ball for the last year or so, last 2 years even. So there's plenty of talent there, plenty of upside. I think his work ethic is commendable. Posting it on social media is fine, cool, whatever. I like to see the journey. But there it comes expectations when you post stuff on social media saying how hard you work. You know what I mean? I work really hard, but I can't perform in games. Like, that's the version I don't want to see. So Kayvon Thibodeau putting it all on social media, showcasing his effort, showcasing his work ethic, now show that work ethic, that effort turns into production. So that's what I'm pretty excited about. There's no reason that he can't be an impact player for this team. And Carter's going to push him. They're all going to be on the field at the same time. Can the Giants have 4 double-digit pass rushers? I mean, if they all stay healthy, I don't see why not. You know what I mean? I don't see why all these guys cannot wreak havoc every single game they play if they're all healthy at the same time. But most importantly, aside from sacks, fourth quarter production. What is all these pass rushers gives you the ability to be healthy in the fourth quarter and have fresh legs. Imagine having Abdul Carter, Brian Burns fresh, ready to go in the fourth quarter because, well, they had other guys able to step in and take a couple plays off. They have Chauncey Golston behind them, having Kayvon, they can take a couple plays off here and there and be ready to go in big critical moments. And we know football, right? It's all about the big moments. It's all about when you need to step up and make a play. The Giants now have enough weapons to deploy that they can make big plays in big moments because they're ready and they're not completely fatigued by the time the end of the game rolls around. That obviously also assumes we're in the game in the fourth quarter and the offense can do enough to score some points.
Yeah, that's one factor that I think we don't necessarily discuss enough. This defense is only going to be as good as the offense lets it be, right? Because if the offense is constantly punting or going 3 and out, quick on and off the field, that's going to be detrimental to the defense as well. But let's flip over to that offensive side of the ball, Alex. We just talked about 2022 5th overall pick, Kayvon Thibodeau. Let's talk about 2022 7th overall pick, Evan Neal. He has a lot to prove going into the 4th season of his career. The Giants declined his 5th-year option, and this offseason told him, you're not a right tackle anymore, buddy. You're moving inside. You're playing left guard. And now he's trying to compete as the backup left guard behind John Runyon, hoping to become the second-string player there. Throughout OTAs and minicamp, it seems as though he was viewed as the second-string left guard. He was getting a lot of those reps and even got some first-team reps with the starters as the left guard. So Could Evan Neal be on the upswing? Could he prove us wrong? Potentially. Am I betting on it? Absolutely not. In fact, I'd probably bet against it based on his career to this point. But I am still hopeful that maybe there is something to unlock in Evan Neal and that this transition to left guard can be beneficial to him. But when we're talking about guys entering training camp with a lot to prove, I do think that Evan Neal is among the top players that has to prove something. He's got to be, one of those guys that stands out, whether that's when the pads come on during practice, whether that's during the preseason, or if that's even just by showing up and being the first one in and the last one out. We need to see a strong work ethic from Evan Neal, and we need to see a dedication and a motivation from him to get better and to improve now that he's made this transition from the right side of the line to left guard. So, Alex, how are you feeling about Evan Neal? It's, again, fourth season of his career. It's a crucial one. If he doesn't perform this year, he's probably walking in free agency next offseason, and the Giants won't extend him. But, hey, maybe he could perform well this season, even in a backup capacity, and earn another year with Big Blue. It's totally possible. I won't rule it out, but it's going to take a lot, and it's going to start with a strong summer of training camp practices.
Absolutely it is. And right now, Evan Neal is nothing more to me than a depth backup player who is an emergency option. That is what he is until proven otherwise. And I think that's an extremely fair perspective. When we look at Evan Neal, when we look at his sample of games, when we look at what's wrong with him, I mean, there's many things, the changing of offenses, the lack of health, the lack of confidence, the lack of reaction. I think the move to guard is going to be very, very beneficial for him. It probably will save his career if there ever was a chance. This is his opportunity to really turn things around. And listen, I will say this. Greg Van Roten is not good enough for me to sit here and tell you right now that job cannot be taken by somebody else, right? Evan Neal will have an opportunity to unseat Greg Van Roten at right guard. And I think that is his best chance. I think that he is a backup until proven otherwise, but I like Greg, and I know you said like at left guard, right? He's going to be playing left guard a lot too. But I think that they will cross-train him in a lot. Because John Runyan, I guess you could push him to right guard. He did play there with the Packers. And you could put Evan Neal at left guard. But I do think that chemistry, like, I don't want to change it up on JMS so much. You know what I mean? Like, John-Michael Schmidz looks to his left. Well, I guess that's my right. Looks to his right, looks to his left. And every single 2 weeks has a different guard next to him. So I don't necessarily want to, like, shake things up as much as possible. I'd like to keep things relatively consistent. But I know Evan Neal has a better track record at left guard. But I think they should train him at both and see which one he takes to better and see which position ends up being the weakness there. Because I'd hate to move a guy. If Runyan looks good in camp, I'd hate to move him if he's already looking strong. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. But I think that with Neal, what's really important is just trying to get him back on the right track, not trying to make him a player who can compete at a below average level at either spot. I want him to specialize in one position that he's most comfortable at and just develop there. And I think that we've talked a lot about players that the Giants draft and immediately just play out of position and then they never develop them. And everybody's like, what happened? This guy had a lot of talent. Evan Neal is one of those guys. He's always been, from his collegiate career until now, more comfortable on the left side of the line. That's where he should have been playing coming out of college, and that's where he should be playing now. And I don't think that taking him at right tackle, flipping him back to the left side of the line, and then cross-training him at right guard as well during training camp would be beneficial to his progress and development. So I'd rather he just continue to compete at left guard, prove that he can be a competent backup there, and if they need to take Greg Van Roten out of the lineup, I would rather flip John Runyan since he has experience starting at both of these positions at a high level as a veteran in the NFL. I would rather him just move to right guard. Similar to how Jermaine Illuminor had experience at both left tackle and right tackle at the NFL level. He flipped to left tackle last season, and he gave us quality play down the stretch. I would rather John Runyan move to right guard and Evan Neal just stay at left guard. And that's if Evan Neal even becomes the second string guy. There is a chance that he would be third string. Maybe Josh Azidu outperforms it in this summer. That's another guy with something to prove throughout the summer as well. John-Michael Schmidz, who you just mentioned, also definitely has some things to prove going into the third season of his career. But I do want to flip back over to the defensive side of the ball and get into this secondary and talk about Deontay Banks, who honestly I feel like I've talked about a little bit too much in recent weeks. There's a lot riding on Deontay Banks going into the third season of his career, going into this training camp, now looked at as the cornerback 2, potentially. He's not even locked into the starting lineup. He's going to have to compete with Cordell Flott, which of course I discussed in yesterday's episode with Daniel. If you guys didn't see that, go check it out and give Daniel a warm welcome to the channel. But Deontay Banks definitely has plenty to prove. And I think that we will learn a lot about him during training camp, because this is going to be a competitive training camp period for him, unlike the ones that he's had in the past. When the Giants drafted him in 2023, they drafted him with the intention of immediately placing him in the starting lineup as their primary cornerback. They didn't do anything to upgrade their secondary really through free agency that offseason. It wasn't until last season, all the way at the end of the offseason, did they re-sign Adoree Jackson, and essentially they thrust Deontay Banks in as the CB1. And now going into year 3 of his career, he's no longer guaranteed a spot in the starting lineup, and he's going to have to fight for it with Cordell Flott, who's entering year 4 of his career, a contract year for him. So he's got every motivation to be the best player he can be. And he's coming off easily his strongest season of his NFL career thus far in 2024. So this is the first time in 3 years that Deontay Banks has been here and he hasn't been handed a starting job. I think that means that he should step in with a lot more competitive nature, and hopefully with some determination, with something lit under him, a little fire lit under him. And hopefully this should be a really nice battle to keep an eye on during training camp. But Alex, when you're looking at Deontay Banks, like I said, a lot riding on his training camp performance, because if he doesn't play well, I think Cordell Flott could end up being the guy in week 1. But how do you feel about that? The fact that the Giants, this is the first time in 3 seasons now with Deontay Banks that they are not guaranteeing him a spot in the starting lineup, and that should hopefully lead him to perform a lot stronger during training camp.
Yeah, I mean, look, every player needs to earn their role. And I think that that's the case for players that have underperformed. And Banks has underperformed. But this is a player that I do think has so much upside, so much athleticism. And I think he just had a actually interview with the Giants huddle, and he seemed comfortable. He seemed poised. His work ethic seems good. His confidence seems back where it needs to be. And I think the Giants did him right. At least they did him wrong at first, but they did him right this offseason and bringing in a player that takes a lot of pressure off of him. No one's thinking Deontay Banks has to hold up. Deontay Banks has to be the guy. Everyone's thinking that Paulson Adebo has to be the guy. Paulson Adebo has to step up. Guy has to be CB1. So Banks kind of gets to fall back into the secondary role and say, I don't have to be the guy anymore. I got to be the guy, the Robin to Batman. And I think that's really a good place for him to be right now, where as he rediscovers his confidence, rediscovers his talent, because he got buried. They changed the scheme on him after 1 season. His own teammates started to turn on him. The effort started to fall apart. Like, yes, he's got to earn his role back, but this is a guy that the talent is there. Like, do not get it twisted. A lot of people have given up on Deontay Banks, and Anthony, I think one thing that we can say on this podcast, we've always stood by the fact that Banks is capable of being a very good cornerback in the NFL. And I think that he is going to prove a lot of people wrong. So I do think that, this is a good position battle. You always want to have a competitor. You mentioned Cordell Flott's in a contract year. Very, very important because he has everything to prove. Look, they're 1 injury away from Flott being in the lineup every day if he doesn't win the starting job outright, which he probably won't. But Flott's a decent player. He's a good backup, a good depth piece, and every team needs good depth cornerbacks, and the Giants have themselves one who can also play in the slot, by the way. So that's really, really important to mention as well. This secondary is much improved financially. They invested $100 million in Holland and Adebo. They can feel confident with with Holland over top in the defensive secondary. Just, protective measures. Tyler Nubin did not show that, as a rookie, he was up to the task just yet with that ball hawking tendency. He's going to be a lot better in that strong safety role, in my opinion. They have Dane Belton as a depth piece, a good depth piece. They brought in Wallace today as a good depth piece. We'll see if he survives camp, but if he does, we'll see, how he progresses. This secondary has a much different look, and you want to know a secondary's best friend? An elite pass rush. So they have the makings of a very balanced unit. They have the makings of a much better secondary, but teams have good number 2 receivers these days. You go look over at the Lions. Jamison Williams is their WR2. I imagine we'll see if Paulson Adebo goes up against Amon-Ra St. Brown and whatnot, but they have just insane amount of talent all over the place. So it's a tough division.
I don't think you need to look as far as the Lions. Just look at the NFC East.
Look
at A.J. Brown,
McLaurin.
Devontae Smith. Look at Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, and now look at CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens. And I think that's
dangerous.
That's a real punch in the face, because when we talked about the Giants signing Paulson Adebo, we said, well, at least Deontay Banks doesn't have to go up against CeeDee Lamb twice a year. Well, he still now has to go up against George Pickens twice a year. So that's not all that much better. I mean, George Pickens is quite the talent himself. So really tough outcome there for Deontay Banks. But you're right. That's the nature of the NFL. Most teams have a very strong wide receiver too. And that's going to be something that we need to monitor. How does Deontay Banks fare against those guys if he even gets to face them? And if it's not Cordell Flott, I think, again, a lot of that's going to ride on the summer. And I think it's going to be a lot of comparing and contrasting between those two players. Who performs better during the preseason, I think, is ultimately going to be the starter by the time the regular season rolls around. But so much upside in Banks. I'm really hoping that he puts it all together. But again, it starts with training camp. Have to put in some strong practices. And I think it also starts in training camp for Jalin Hyatt. Jalin Hyatt did a lot of great things, Alex, during the spring practices, OTAs, and mini camp. But we're talking about non-padded practices, and we're talking about a guy who was catching passes from Russell Wilson because Malik Neighbors wasn't practicing, right? That's the only reason Jalin Hyatt was playing with the first team and was in the starting lineup. He hasn't truly earned starting lineup reps. It's just because there was an injury. Now, going into training camp, Jalin Hyatt will not be catching passes from the team's best quarterback in Russell Wilson. He'll be playing with the second team. He'll be playing with Jameis Winston and having to earn his right to be back up in the starting lineup, rotating with Darius Slayton, who I don't think is going to be too keen on letting Hyatt get back into the starting lineup. So I think that Jalin Hyatt still has a lot to prove going into year 3 of his career. I think the number one thing he needs to prove is that he can run a more expansive route tree and not just run straight downfield all the time. Obviously, the added weight is going to be a huge bonus for him. He added 20 to 25 pounds. He said that last season he was playing around 170. He's now playing around 190 to 195. I think that's great because physicality, or a lack thereof, has been a major weakness for him through the first 2 seasons of his career. But he has a lot to prove. Prove that added weight didn't slow him down. Prove that it will allow him to be a more physical and effective wide receiver option on the outside. I think there's a lot riding on training camp as well for Jalin Hyatt because honestly, Alex, we view him as that number 4 receiver, right? It's Malik Neighbors, it's Wan'Dale Robinson, it's Darius Slayton, and then it's Jalin Hyatt. But there are some other guys on the back end of this roster, whether we're talking Zach Pascal, the veteran that the Giants signed, or those 3 UDFAs that I talked about a few days ago, and Dalen Cambry, Bo Collins, and Jordan Bly, and even a 4th one in Antoine Wells. There's a lot of guys gunning for active roster spots at the wide receiver position. So there's plenty that Jalin Hyatt needs to prove during training camp to demonstrate to the coaching staff that he could be an effective option on Sundays during the regular season. So, Alex, what are you thinking about Jalin Hyatt? He's not going to be training with the first team at the start of training camp like he was during OTAs. Neighbors is going to be back in the lineup. Now he's going to the second team with Jameis Winston, but still has a lot to prove if he wants to earn some of those first team reps.
Well, I can say one thing. The Giants finally have enough talent at some positions that they don't have to just give jobs away. You know what I mean? So that to me is very important. Jalin Hyatt has not earned the right to be practicing with the first team. Not even close, guys. Not even relatively close. He has got to work his way. I know he said, tweets things like a month and a half ago or whatever it was, they're gonna regret this or this, whatever, something along those lines. I need to see you play well before I even think of you as a contributor on this team. Jalin Hyatt has got to earn his way up this totem pole, up this food chain, man. You got to dominate with the 2s to get on the field with the 1s. So I'm glad the Giants are finally not hand delivering jobs to guys who have not earned them. There has to be a pecking order. You know what I mean? There has to be a system where bad players just don't get playing time because we don't have anybody else. You know what I mean? That's what good football teams have. They have good enough starters and good enough depth where guys that should not be playing are not playing, you know what I mean? Unless they have no choice because of injuries. The Giants are in a spot where they have some depth. They don't have to just throw, guys that don't deserve jobs into critical spots. So Jalin Hyatt, happy that he has to earn his way back up the totem pole. And the Giants, Slayton, this contract is good. It's fine. It's nominal, for a player of his stature. And I do think that Russell Wilson will get some good value out of him. So pretty encouraged by what the Giants have. But, for the most part, just glad we have some more depth. Glad we have some more talent. I do think we do need another receiver probably next year. But that's a topic for another day. We'll see how Slayton bounces back with Russell Wilson under the helm and how the chemistry he develops with Jackson Dart turns out too, because that will be very important long-term.
Most definitely. I will say on the quarterback note, I don't know how much Russell Wilson truly has to prove, but I do think he needs to prove that he is a certain degree better than the quarterbacks behind him, right? And mainly the quarterback being Jackson Dart. there's going to be chatter all season long, whether we want there to be or not, about Jackson Dart and how soon he's going to get into the starting lineup. In fact, over the last several weeks, we even heard it. We heard guys like Daniel Jeremiah, Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, all these different reporters coming out of the woodworks to say it sounds like it's going to be sooner rather than later that we get Jackson Dart in the starting lineup. That's been happening already, and we're not even close to week 1. We're not even close to the Giants potentially, if this happens, being in a stretch where they have a losing record in the first month of the first 2 months of the season, and fans start calling for Jackson Dart because that's what they would do if that were to come true. So I think that, again, I don't think that Russell Wilson has a lot to prove himself, but I do think he needs to prove that he is head and shoulders better than Jackson Dart in order to prevent the Giants from turning it over to the rookie too soon. And obviously, the only way he's going to prove that is going to be through winning football games during the regular season. So he doesn't have anything to prove during training camp, but definitely during the regular season, Russell Wilson's going to have something to prove. So mentioning that since you did bring up the quarterbacks. But Alex, is there anybody else when you're looking at this roster who has something to prove going into the 2025 training camp period? It's going to be fun. There's going to be roster battles. There's going to be position battles. But, who's got something in your eyes with something to prove as we enter training camp starting tomorrow?
The guy that I have at the top of my mind is John Michael Schmidz, because John Michael Schmidz has to play better football, man. We invested a second-round pick in this guy, and he has not even looked close to recovering that value the first couple years of his contract. So, this is entering year 3. He has to step up. He is a critical component of the offensive line. He is the communicator. He is the glue in the middle. So I do think having a better quarterback will help him a lot, having more consistency around him. But Giants did not upgrade anything on this offensive line in terms of starting players. They have a healthy Andrew Thomas, conceivably. I don't even think he's fully healthy yet. We have John Michael Schmidz coming off a really bad year. Greg Van Roten, who is now 30, almost 36 years old. He's average at very best. You have Jermaine Illuminor, my GOAT, and then we have John Runyon, who was coming off a disappointing season. And he also got hurt. This is an offensive line that's hanging on by a thread. JMS has to perform better. His elevation will make the entire unit look substantially better. But being able to communicate properly with Russell Wilson, more pre-snap information, like there's things that I think Wilson will be able to help him with that will make him better and demand better. Daniel Jones just missed so much pre-snap that I think that was problematic. If your center and your quarterback are on the same page, it takes a lot of pressure off of everybody else. So that combination, JMS is one guy that I need to see take a big step forward. Otherwise, this line is going to struggle again.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'm curious to see how JMS performs during the summer practices, but I'm also curious to see who's competing with him at the center spot. And is that going to be Marcus Bowe potentially? Could he be battling for the center spot? Obviously, the Giants drafted him to be a tackle, but he mentioned that he's willing to play any of the 5 positions, and he does have experience playing guard, but he did mention that he's willing to play center, and honestly, his body type really does fit well for the center position, so I'm curious to see if anybody does compete with John Michael Schmidz at the center spot, but definitely a lot to prove for those offensive linemen in general there, and one last name that I'll throw out there, Graham Gano. I think he has plenty to prove going into this season. There is competition for him with McAdamney, the Scottish kicker that the Giants have on the roster, who's going to be competing with Gano for the starting job this summer. I think that the number one thing Gano needs to prove, stay healthy. He needs to prove that he can stay healthy. So throughout training camp, if he ends up pulling a hamstring at any point, I think the Giants just need to cut him loose, take the cap savings, and go ahead with McAdamney or some other veteran that they sign in free agency. So that's one last bonus player that I'll throw out there for you. I think Graham Gano has a lot to prove heading into this training camp. But I think that's pretty much going to wrap this one up. Before we do end it, though, I just want to say, guys, if you like the Let's Ride t-shirt, the Russell Wilson-inspired Giants Nation Let's Ride, head over to empiresportsmedia.com, click the store tab up in the top right, and go get one because I like them, and they fit really nicely, and they're very comfortable. So make sure you do go check these out and some of the other offerings that we have for Fireside Giants gear for you guys over on empiresportsmedia.com. That is pretty much going to wrap this one up. Once again, guys, really excited to see you all at training camp next Thursday and Friday. Stay tuned for the channel, and also follow us on social media at Fireside Giants to follow along with us during training camp. We're going to have the best coverage possible for you guys every single day, whether we're there in person at the practice or not. Trust me, you don't want to miss what we're posting. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening to Apple or Spotify, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go New York Giants. Perfect.